think let's see how we proceed. So I wanted to actually start by welcoming very warmly Rajagopalji and ask him to begin the panel. Rajagopalji is a Namaskar, is a Gandhian activist, former vice chairman of the Gandhi Peace Foundation in New Delhi, and I think most importantly for us, the president and founding member of Ekta Parishad, which is India's land rights movement. So Rajaji, the question we are trying to address today is faced with all the challenges that Christian and I explained a little bit. What are the collective courses of action that can be proposed to counter the levels of dispossession and increase of landlessness that we see around the world? So please, Rajaji, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Milan Bhai. Thanks for this invitation. And it was nice to see a brief of what was already discussed, and it is very rich and good input. And I agree with much of what is said, so I don't have to repeat it. See, I have always believed that the real solution of many of the problems that we are facing today is around redistribution of natural resources to the local communities. Whether it is the issue of poverty, disparity, migration, violence, climate crisis, and unless people have control over natural resources, unless people have control over decision making, nothing is going to change. According to me, even the success of SDG, Sustainable Development Goal will very much depend on how far we will advance in this direction in terms of people's control over natural resources and people's control over decision making. Otherwise, we are not going to go very far. That is why Mahatma Gandhi said that, look, self-sufficient, self-governed communities should be the base for building a nation. Without self-sufficient communities and self-governed communities, ruling from the top is not going to make a good state, a good country, a good community. So on this issue of land reform, I can think two methods today. I'm just flagging it. I mean, some of it may even look funny, but now look, two methods that are coming to my mind today for reflection is that, according to me, there is a thing called people-led land reforms. It's like state-led land reforms. We will come to that later, because we are expecting a state that doesn't really represent the people in many cases to reform in the interest of poor people. So what is this people-centered land reforms? You see, Vinoba Bhave, a disciple of Mahatma Gandhi, tried it in India, and he was able to collect 4.2 million acres of land and redistribute that among landless people. His position was, look, approaching the state is basically approaching the representatives of the people. Now, why do you go to the representatives when you have the capacity to go to the people directly? So rather than going to the representatives, can we approach the people and request them to address this issue? Because I think this is a time to do it. Why I say this? Society need to think how to make the society better. Now, rather than expecting a government to think about everything, why can't the society think how to make the society better? And society as a whole should also feel very proud when they solve many of the problems that they are facing today. So can ultimately society take responsibility for change, including land reforms and control over resources, etc. Look, let me give some examples of why community need to take responsibility. See, much of the commons in the villages, in the communities are controlled and occupied by farmers who already have land. So rather than allowing landless people to occupy the commons, it is in the hands of people who already have land. Why people settled abroad with huge income have land back home in the villages. Why people who are paid and greatly and employed with good salaries hold on to land without cultivating? Or why companies are keeping so much excess land when millions of people are without an inch of land? So the society has become so selfish that they don't see that they also have a role, and everybody will say, go to the government, ask the government to change laws. So when the society is not taking responsibility for reforms and eradicate poverty and reduce violence, then things are not going to change. So we need to see why there is some serious problem with our societies, especially in southern part of the world, where people are pushed to Mediterranean Sea to sink and die, while people are not willing to distribute the resources that are there and can be resourced. So one argument I want to make today is that this is time for us to go back to the society, because that is where the power is originating. This power is given to the representatives, and we are running after the representatives, and the real power holders are not doing anything. So I'm speaking of the countries where there is some amount of democracy. The second argument I want to make is the state-led land reforms. I want to say even weak states, you don't need a strong state to implement land reforms. There are many areas even a weak state can do. For example, the two questions that people generally raise is state, if you go to land reform, there will be conflict and violence, or we don't have enough land to redistribute. These arguments are useless because there are so many areas of land reforms, even without conflict, even without having land. For example, retrieval of lost land. Millions of people have lost their land. It is being occupied by powerful people. It's only taking the land and giving back to the people who are the owners of this land. You don't need extra land to give. So the idea we don't have land to give has no meaning. For example, regularization of land. Millions of people are already on a piece of land. It's only a question of regularizing. You don't have to find new land to give to them. So why can't regularize this land on which poor people are living already? Or resolve disputes. It's like how much money, how much time is spent by poor people going to the court for nothing. It is my own land. Please resolve this dispute so I can occupy this land and cultivate. So what I'm trying to say, even for a weak government, there are so many areas without conflict and violence, so many things can be solved. So the softer part of land reforms are not addressed. So one request that we should really take up globally is that don't speak about we don't have land to distribute and there will be violence, etc. Do the softer part of land reforms to begin with, and we will then go to the harder part of land reforms. The final thing, I know the 8 minutes will come soon. Final thing will be about mobilization, because scale is important. I believe that having organized many long marches, etc., I understand that scale is very important, and we need to really work hard to scale it up, because to speak to a government that doesn't represent the poor people anymore, we need the kind of strength, and this is a challenge that we are facing. But I think this is also an opportunity, because after COVID, millions of people have come back and they feel humiliated, they feel insulted, and their resources were taken away already, and they were pushed into cities. They are back now. There is no place to go. So there is a huge population now wanting to be mobilized around this issue of my rights, my land, my resources, etc. Important for all of us to understand this possibility and work around it. Finally, a well-organized mobilization also deserves a well-organized, well-trained cadre of a group of activists, because in the absence of a well-organized, well-trained activist, very often the movements are not succeeding. So that is a very important challenge, and I think we need to invest time and resources at that place right away, so that in the coming years, larger mobilization is possible. In India, of course, we are thinking about a pan-India movement, because in spite of many years of work, we are only in 150 districts out of 724 or 34. So this is not going to make the impact. So a pan-India movement is what we are planning. So pan-African, everywhere we will have to think of large-scale mobilization to address these issues. Thank you very much, Milun Bhai. That is what I wanted to bring in 8 minutes here.
Yeah, thanks very much, Rajgopal. That's quite a lot. I think your point about the need of the hour of the redistribution of land and controlled by the community of decision making, and a very important point of the Gandhian principle of self-governed, self-sufficient communities, what he called also the village republics. And I think your concept of what you're also working on a daily basis, people-centered land reform. But I also want to stress the last point you made, that we do need large mobilization and a group of activists, and we need to scale it up. And I think that scaling up, of course, at the national, local level is important, but I think we'll also be discussing today the need to scale up at the international level. Also a sense of solidarity. And
absolutely.
So thank you very much. And I move to the second speaker today, Hortense. I won't spell the whole name. Hortense Dolores. She's a member of Via Campesina from Congo, president of the College of Rural Women of PROPAC, and member of the coordination committee of Via Campesina of Central and Western Africa. And Via Campesina has, of course, played a very, perhaps a central role in bringing, not only the issue of small farmers, but also a set of global standards that we are all attempting to use now. So Hortense, please. Hortense, are you there?
I think Hortense has some problem connecting, so maybe if you can.
Okay, I'll move to the. Okay, so we'll move ahead. Welcome, Michael. Great to see you, and I want to invite you for your statement. Michael Taylor is the director of the International Land Coalition, and he's been director since 2015, and has actually grown up wait a second. Hans is there? Can you hear us?
Oui, bonjour.
Bonjour. Michael, sorry, do you mind if I go back?
Merci. C'est dur,
okay.
hein?
Okay, go ahead. Yes.
C'est dur avec l'Afrique. Donc, voyez-vous, le courant est parti, c'est revenu. La connexion est instable, c'est compliqué. Alors, comme on venait de dire que moi, je travaille avec les femmes, surtout sur le problème de foncier. En Afrique, on a un grand souci avec les femmes sur le foncier. Parce que, premièrement, la tradition nous fait défaut, que la femme n'hérite pas. Elle doit travailler les terres de son mari. Et quand le mari meurt, la femme-là n'a plus de terre. Donc, elle est demi-nue. Et à la fin, on laisse les enfants à la femme. Personne ne s'en occupe. Donc, la femme est obligée de louer des lopins de terre pour nourrir la femme. Donc, c'est un combat fort que nous sommes en train d'emmener en Afrique centrale comme de l'Ouest pour trouver une loi favorable au profit de la femme. Donc, ça, c'est le travail que nous faisons en tant que présidente du Collège des femmes. Et en parlant de la terre normale, nous, au niveau de l'Afrique centrale d'abord, il y a un revue qu'on a fait un plaidoyer sur les terres par les accaparements des multinationales des terres. Et le revue, là, j'ai filmé ça, j'ai envoyé à Christian. On avait fait un plaidoyer, la CENOP Congo a fait partie. On a travaillé, j'ai envoyé un peu le résumé aux interprètes. Mais là, on ne va pas parler de tout ce qu'on a pu écrire. C'est pour réagir à ce que Christian a dit. Et nous avons fait au niveau de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, on a travaillé en alliance avec Convergence Terre et Eau, qui est Massa, où on a fait 2 caravanes pour faire le tour de tous les pays membres de l'Afrique de l'Ouest. Et l'Afrique centrale était partie les attendre au Bénin pour continuer la marche. où on a déposé le dossier au président béninois, on a eu le livre vert pour dire les terres appartiennent à la population parce que c'est la population qui nourrit le monde. Parce que les petits producteurs, s'ils existent, il y aura la crise. Nous sommes souverains. On ne peut pas sacrifier nos ventres pour avoir la sécurité alimentaire. C'est la nourriture qu'on nous impose. Mais nous, on doit avoir des terres pour travailler, des produits ancestraux que nos ancêtres ont laissés. Donc, la terre, elle est nécessaire pour les paysans et les paysannes de l'Afrique. Vous, le gouvernement, ne bradez pas nos terres aux multinationales qui viennent faire de nos terres pour produire seulement des agrocarburants, des produits de rente. Parce que si aujourd'hui, une paysanne qui fait un lopin de terre, quand il a nourri sa famille, la deuxième partie, elle peut vendre à la communauté. Et le peu, ça va dans les grandes villes. Le peu là qui vont dans les grandes villes, allez-y dans les marchés, qui nourrit la population. C'est les petits producteurs. Mais pourquoi aujourd'hui les petits producteurs ne peuvent pas avoir des terres? Il faut les sécuriser, ces terres-là, pour les petits producteurs. Donc, chez moi, au Congo, exemple, quand on a fait le plaidoyer, on a dit oui, on va donner les titres fonciers aux petits producteurs, mais il faut payer 200 000. Vous voyez, c'est l'État. Les petits producteurs, c'est l'État aussi, qui doivent nourrir la population. Pour leur donner des titres gratuits, ils doivent payer 200 000. On a donné un délai de 2 ans. Si tu n'as pas fini de payer tes 200 000, la terre revient à l'État. Mais vous voyez que nous, en Afrique, on fait beaucoup d'enfants. Une femme peut avoir 8, 10. Donc, comment j'aurai l'argent pour aller d'abord donner? Déjà que la femme, pour avoir la terre, elle est difficile. Et si elle a pu acheter ça, il faut sécuriser encore. Donc, il faut une loi pour ces femmes. Donc, je disais, normalement, quand on a parlé de ce que M. Christian a dit sur la privatisation des terres, on avance, oui, c'est compliqué. Les multinationales ne font qu'avancer. Donc, nous sommes en train de défendre. Maintenant, sur la rétribution des terres, sur la réforme agraire, on a vu la conséquence du pays, par exemple, le Zimbabwe. Quand Mugabe était là, quand il a fait la réforme agraire, tous les pays du Nord, là, ont fermé les frontières. Le Zimbabwe a souffert de la faim pour dire que vous avez fait la réforme agraire, on a laissé les terres aux petits producteurs, vous avez rétribution, mais il n'y a pas d'entrée de nourriture. C'était dur. Donc, on doit voir quand un pays est décidé vraiment de travailler sur les réformes agraires, quels sont les canaux qu'on peut prendre pour éviter que ce genre de situation arrive. Donc, le Zimbabwe, c'est un grand exemple pour nous. Pour les stratégies à venir pour le problème de la terre, j'avais dit, si nous sommes forts, on va gagner. Mais si nous sommes faibles, on ne va pas gagner. Pourquoi? Il faut créer beaucoup d'alliances et des alliances vraiment fortes, qui sont, c'est-à-dire des mouvements qui sont vraiment forts, qui travaillent sur le problème de la terre. Faisons tous ensemble et on va voir les traités, les accords internationaux qu'ils ont eus sur le problème de la terre, quels sont les plus pertinents. Et les plus pertinents, là, on revise ça pour voir qu'est-ce qu'il faut faire pour trouver une solution qui soit l'accord ou 2 ou 3 qui sont vraiment pertinents internationaux et que quand nos gouvernements sont devant ces accords-là, ils peuvent signer comme ils peuvent refuser, je sais. Deuxièmement, en dehors du gouvernement, nous-mêmes, la population, les chefs coutumiers, les chefs du village qui disent que le village m'appartient, donc les terres m'appartiennent, ces chefs coutumiers aussi nous cassent la tête parce qu'ils travaillent avec les multinationales. Les multinationales, parfois, ne traite pas vers le gouvernement, va directement voir un chef coutumier qui est propriétaire des terres fertiles et arables. Il converse avec lui, il accepte, il signe des accords et un jour, Les gens sont en train de travailler, on va dire que non, vous ne pouvez plus travailler ici, enlevez tout. C'est les tracteurs qui viennent détruire les produits des paysans parce que le chef coutumier a vendu sa terre, sans prévenir même les paysans. Donc, dans ce combat-là, non seulement international, mais le travail doit se faire d'abord dans nos communautés, dans nos districts, dans nos départements, régions et venir au niveau national. À partir du niveau national, c'est là où ça peut prendre continental et international. Parce qu'il faut toucher le fond. Parfois, le gouvernement n'est pas au courant, mais c'est les chefs coutumiers, les propriétaires terriens, les chefs du village sont en train de trop brader les terres aux multinationales, sont passés par le gouvernement. Ça, c'est un point important par rapport au forum. Donc, je pense que je ne sais pas si je dois lire le résumé. Donc, nous, au niveau de l'Afrique centrale et de l'Ouest, par exemple, l'Office du Niger, tout autour, il y avait des paysans qui travaillaient pour nourrir la population. Un jour, des entrepreneurs libyens viennent avec les tracteurs, viennent raser tout ce que les producteurs des Mali avaient fait. Mais le Mali est parti en conflit, il y a eu mort d'hommes, des paysans. Mais vous voyez que les paysans sont faibles devant les multinationales qui ont tout le matériel. C'était difficile. C'est là où nous tous, nous sommes en train de forcer d'avoir de lois. Au Cameroun, c'est dur avec ce programme pour les palmiers à huile, où on prend les villages entiers pour dire que vous ne travaillez pas ailleurs, vous travaillez chez nous, on va vous payer et on ne les paye pas pendant une année. Vous ne pouvez pas ramasser les noix de palme qui tombent. On vous met en prison, on vous chicote. C'est l'esclavagisme. C'est pour cela nous-mêmes, on travaille avec l'Alliance qui travaille sur les forêts tropicaux. Là, le samedi, je veux partir au nord du pays pour aller voir cette communauté qui souffre entre les exploitants forestiers et les exploitations qui font les palmiers à huile qu'on appelle éco-énergie. On va travailler sur cette communauté pour voir quel soutien à apporter et écouter leurs doléances. Donc, tout ça là, c'est vraiment un grand travail au niveau de l'Afrique. Si nous ne sommes pas forts, les petits producteurs vont disparaître. Donc, pour que nous soyons forts, soyons unis, travaillons la main dans la main, mais de commencer du village pour monter en haut et non de commencer en haut pour descendre au village. Donc, je pense que c'est tout ce que je pouvais dire. Le petit résumé se trouve entre vous. Vous pouvez lire ce que j'ai pu écrire en résumé. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup.
Thanks very much. And thanks for stressing the need for the recognition of women's inheritance rights. And I think you reaffirmed what Rajagopalji was saying about the land belongs to the peasants and the importance of sustenance and the need for strong bonds. I think the solidarity issue we're talking about today and the challenge of the international agreements to which Via Campesina has been a part, particularly the Declaration on the Rights of Peasants. But the big challenge now of how do we implement these? And I think part of that would be how do we hold what you were stressing? How do we hold our public officials accountable and also the private actors that are denying rights and resources to the peasants? So thanks very much, Nancy, for your comment. So I'll now move to Michael Taylor. Mike, I'm going to introduce you again. Michael is the director of the International Land Coalition since 2015 and has had a lifelong experience and commitment on land rights, growing up in a small village in Botswana, and I think from that onwards, you now come to a stage where you're actually coordinating a very large alliance and a large organization towards land rights across the world. So I think, Michael, you know the question we're trying to address of what are the collective courses of action that you see that we have been taking. Perhaps some of them have not worked. Now that, what can we do together? So please, Michael.
Thank you so much, Milun, and it's really a privilege to be part of this seminar. Thank you for inviting me, and it's a super privilege to follow such excellent speakers and incredible organizations that work around the world. So I bring you greetings from Botswana, my home country, and also from the ILC network, which has members based in about 80 countries around the world. What brings our membership together is a common vision of what our members call people-centered land governance. So this is, I'm glad that several people have used the word people-centered, because I think when we talk about our work for land rights, we need to constantly be protecting the idea that land is for people. Land is not a commodity. Land is not for money. Land is about human dignity and human well-being. And human survival. And so our members have defined people-centered land governance as the land governance which respects indigenous peoples' territorial rights, which gives equal land rights for women, which allows ecosystems to be managed sustainably and locally, which protects land rights defenders, which does not allow land grabbing. And so this vision, as we contrast it with reality, and going back to the summary that Christian gave us at the beginning, we can see very clearly that we're failing, that we're not succeeding to bring about the kind of reforms that we would like to see. And in fact, although many countries have brought about 10-year reforms in the past few decades, the reality is, again, as Christian said in the beginning, land inequality is worse than it has been. In fact, it's been getting worse since the 1980s. So in a report that we put out at the end of last year, the culmination of several years of research, bringing together about 30 different organizations, one of the things we found is that land inequality is actually over 40% worse than we thought it was, using traditional statistical methods. The largest 1% of the farms in the world operate more than 70% of the farmland. The bottom 50% of farmers own less than 2% of the land. And the reality is land grabbing is continuing, dispossession is continuing, it's getting worse. And even in these pandemic conditions in which suffering is coming to so many people, we see land grabbers taking advantage of lockdown to do even more land grabbing. And in all of this, the most vulnerable land is the commons, those shared resources that provide a safety net to the poorest in our society. And the most vulnerable people are the people who live on the commons. So I think it's very clear, and every speaker has said that we have a problem, and it's a systemic problem. It's not a surface problem. It's a problem which is we have created by the economic and the social systems that we've created around us. And therefore, as we look to a solution, we need systemic change. And systemic change means power shifts. It means shifting power from those who have it currently, from the political and economic elite, to the women, to the men, and to the communities who live on the land, and to the organizations that represent those women, men, and communities. And I think the most important way of understanding how we can bring about system change was mentioned by Christian in the last point of his slide, was repeated by Rajagopal, and was repeated as well by Hortense. All of them referred to alliances, how we create alliances nationally, regionally, and globally that can transform the systems that currently perpetuate inequality and dispossession from land and territory. So if you'd allow, I'd like to share from an ILC perspective 3 actions in building these alliances that I think is our contribution as ILC, and that we are working on together with other organizations and agencies beyond our network, that give us a chance of seeing in reality over the next decade people-centered land governance coming to mean better land rights for the women, for the men, for the communities who live on the land and use it. So each of these 3 thrusts that I'm going to describe really rely on building wide partnerships. We're not going to make progress unless we can build wide partnerships. But it's not only about wide partnerships, it's about building partnerships that are in solidarity with people's organizations. When I say people's organizations, I mean the likes of Via Campesina, the likes of Ekta Parishad, those organizations that belong to the people who live on the land, whether they're women, whether they're farmers, whether they're indigenous peoples, whether they're landless people, whether they are pastoralists, those organizations that belong to them, those are the organizations that need to be taking the lead. And the role of the rest of us is to work together in solidarity behind and in support of people's organizations. So let me share each of these areas of partnership building that we as ILC will be dedicating ourselves to over the next decade in our strategy, which will take us to 2030. And that I really hope that we'll be working together with many of the kinds of organizations that are on this call to bring into reality. So the first is at the national level and building national coalitions for change. The national level in countries, that's where the change happens. And that's where we need to be building what Raja Gopal referred to as countrywide mass movements for change. And so these are partnerships of like-minded organizations. In the lead are people's organizations. They're rooted in people's organizations, but they bring around them partners that are able to support their agenda. And so work in solidarity with the struggles of local communities for their land. Often these partnerships go beyond people's organizations, though. They may include NGO support organizations. They may include research organizations. They may even include government agencies that can identify with and that can become allies in these change agendas. Over the last 6 years, ILC, through such partnerships in 30 countries, has achieved over 83 people-centered policies on laws and land rights. But changing policy is not enough. And we know that so many countries have changed laws and changed policies, but that has not changed anything for the reality of people who live in their communities and on their land. And so as we look ahead, our challenge really is getting these partnerships behind bringing real change, making sure that those policies are implemented on the ground in the communities, which Raja Gopal referred to as the sort of bottom-up community and democracy and state building from the bottom up, not from the top down. And I think all of us have a challenge in supporting this process, in really investing in the leadership of women, that women leaders can be real change makers where they're given the space to be leaders and where their leadership is supported. And unfortunately, many of our organizations don't sufficiently support women leadership. So that's a change that we need to bring in our own organizations as we seek these wider changes in our countries. So the first is building strong, powerful national coalitions that work with a long-term vision for bringing change. The second area is what we call in ILC people-centered data. So data gives the power to open up and to expose and to lay bare realities. It also gives the power to shape those realities. And unfortunately, the reality is that data on land is often missing. Official data sets don't have them. You may know that no countries in the first 5 years of reporting on the SDGs have reported on the land indicators, because for many different reasons, but one of those reasons is many countries don't have that data. And so the lack of progress is hidden, it's not visible. The continued dispossession is not visible because we don't have the numbers to show that. And so we're supporting not just any data, but people-centered data. This is data which is collected, managed, used, and controlled by people's organizations, that puts the power of data in the hands of people and allows them to show the reality that they see on the ground and allows them to hold decision makers accountable. Those may be government decision makers, a local government or national government. There may also be corporations, and accountability needs to extend right across all kinds of decision makers, and data is a pathway to doing that. And then thirdly and finally, we need to support these national processes through powerful regional and global partnerships that can advocate for right to land and can shift norms. I think we've made a lot of success together, and organizations like Via Campesina have really been in the forefront of the recent UN declaration on the rights of peasants. The African Land Policy Framework and Guidelines has been a common effort, the VGGTs. Right now, we're working together as ILC and other organizations, especially Via Campesina, are playing a very strong role in promoting the recognition of the right to land as a human right. We hope that we will be successful together. But these regional and global frameworks are incredibly important in shifting global norms towards a greater acceptance of the importance of land rights. And I think this is important as we look to the decade ahead and we see the great challenges the world is facing, not only emerging from a pandemic, but climate change, but huge and increasing inequality, the erosion of democracy. And underneath all of these issues is land rights. Land rights is central to dealing with climate change. Land rights is central to building democracy. It's central to overcoming inequality. It's central to sustainable and resilient local food systems. But we will have to struggle together to keep it visible and to build commitment, political will and commitment. And just to bring in the same principle again here, as we work together at a regional and global level, we need to work together to be a platform for people's voices. The voices that need to be heard are the voices of the women and the men in the communities, pastoralists, fisherfolk, indigenous peoples who live on the land. Those are the voices that need to be heard in these regional and global processes. So let me just conclude by just re-expressing the commitment of ILC to be part of building these partnerships and alliances, and our commitment to build partnerships in a way that complements strong autonomous people's organizations. Partnerships don't work, they don't bring about change unless alongside those partnerships, in those partnerships, but also alongside those partnerships, are strong voices of land users, are strong social movements that carry the voices of land users into those change processes. And in those partnerships, we have a commitment as well as ILC. As ILC, the leadership role is played by people's organizations, and wherever possible, is played by women. So as we look at the challenges ahead, I hope that we can see the next decade, not only the big challenges we face, but also the possibilities as we bring our different, very diverse strengths together in these common struggles. And in doing so, that we can achieve a more just, equitable, and sustainable world. Back to you, Milun. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks very much, Michael. That was very good and very concise. I think your point that we face a systemic problem and we need systemic change is very, very, very important. And it's actually the entrenched systems that are even taking advantage, as you correctly pointed out, of the COVID situation and increased land grabbing. But I think your stress also on alliance building, which seems to have, it's becoming a theme today, which is exactly what is needed. And that we should all play a sort of supportive role, or as you mentioned, be a platform for voices, and your point on the need for women leadership and this new issue that you brought up, which I think a lot of people working on land don't really think about, which is also what ILC has been working on the production of people-centered data. I think it's very important. So thanks very much for your statement. I'll now move to the final speaker. Today is Glory Leong. Welcome, Glory. She's a member of FIAN International from Cameroon and works on FIAN's program on access to and control over natural resources, which is actually coordinating participatory action research on community-driven bottom-up accountability. I think it's what Michael was referring to as well. Initiatives in natural resource governance in West Africa. So Glory, please go ahead. You have 8 minutes.
Thank you very, very much for the introduction, and good afternoon once more to everyone. I'm very happy to be here to share and also to learn experiences and thoughts. My input would be structured at 2 levels. Thought reflections at strategies that could maybe be tried at international levels, and strategies that could be tried at national level, largely based on the experience of my work since 2014, working with national level civil society organizations to demand bottom-up accountability in large-scale land acquisitions and also on policy intersections. How do we hold investors and governments accountable in areas where we have conflicting or intersecting policies? But before I go ahead, I want to start touch a bit on what Christian said. He opened up the revisions of the previous discussions that the development models of the West cannot be copied pasted in the South, in countries of the global South. So realities, context, and the rest are different. But one thing when I was preparing my presentation that came to my mind is, meanwhile, the development models cannot be copied. Development financing and investment is largely built around the model of Western Western development. And this brings us therefore to the issue of value of the dollar, bringing everything into economic models. And that is where my first point of intervention comes in. It is at the level of financialization. How are processes of land grabbing, land dispositions financed? So when we look at this, these are very complex and some often opaque processes where we have huge development programs funded by funders, webs that are not so easily understandable to local communities, to national level organizations. And for us to be able to overcome or demand accountability and get land redistribution and agrarian reforms, for example, we need to do something about these webs of opaque and corrupt financial institutions that are funding such kinds of investment. I am not saying all investments are that way, but largely this is how they are. And therefore, at this level, we need to think about robust South-North alliances that are able, with the technical expertise, with the knowledge, that are able to map, identify, and then begin to mobilize towards dismantling such opaque processes. When we think about, for example, the processes going on in Matopiba in Brazil, where you have pension funds in Europe funding huge scales of dispossession and involuntary resettlements, it's an example of such. And more recently, we are having moves about digitization of agriculture and land governance data to improve, in quote, efficiency. I am not saying data is wrong or is bad, but from some experiences, like Michael said, it is important that the data be from the communities, from the people. But when the data is driven by business models, is driven by profit and how the value of fertile lands, then we are now paving our way towards a deep dive of more opaque and complex processes of disposition. So at the international level, our thought is that there is need for these strong alliances with technical expertise necessary to do this dismantling, and therefore then we can have issues of extraterritorial obligations holding the financial institutions accountable to obligations that the home states have assigned to. And now at national level, the contribution I also make based on the experience of 6 years doing this has been that, like my previous panelist said, is about building national alliances that would work towards the legal recognition of customary tenure systems to create space for communities to be able to manage, to self-manage their land and associated natural resources, and to be able also to engage, therefore, in agroecology, in more sustainable ways of cultivation. But then at this point, I would give a break to insist that when we clamor for customary tenure, we need to reflect these national alliances would need to keep an eye on how inclusive customary tenure systems or collective commons are governed, to be sure that they're inclusive of youth, they're inclusive of women, because when you listen to, for example, what Otan said, women are often excluded. So this comes to a point in such alliances, we have to also re-examine how the collectives, how the customary systems are governed in a way that is inclusive of all members of the community. That's one of the points I want to make. And another point I want to make is that, like all the panelists shared, and also Christian already said, there is need for agrarian reform and land redistribution. This is evident in the whole discussion so far, but why is there this need? As we are constantly talking about land grabbing and large-scale agricultural programs, we see there is huge concentration of land. And so without this redistribution, it becomes a bit difficult for communities, for women to be able to engage in sustainable models of farming, or also youths, in terms of youth who are migrating out because they can't access land. So this is also another angle to why we need to reconsider land agrarian reform and land redistribution, and national level alliances would need to have an eye on this. Now, my next talking point is, I have talked about robust national alliances or international alliances, but then there is now an issue on accountability. How do we do bottom-up accountability? How can we get functional alliances? So from our experience, it is not just a given that because communities are fighting to defend their land rights or their water rights or forest rights, they would get along. Often democratic actions from below has dynamics. It has dynamics within social movements, how they are organized, how they are able to work with each other, but also dynamics from the government to sometimes fragilize, to make the alliances weaker. These are dynamics that need to be thought about. We also have challenges sometimes, like how are we able to bring together movements that are working in environment, in land, in forest, grazier, so multi-class, multi-sectorial, and multi-caste, depending upon where we are talking about, movements that are working on these kinds of things. Because in our experience, we learned that it is only when we bring together movements, organizations, communities that that approach things in a holistic manner, that also amplifies voice, that we have positive gains. When we have only monosectorial or monoclass, sometimes it becomes very complicated. We also have the challenge of criminalization. So how are we able to support these movements that are defending their rights, that are clamoring for their right to self-manage their resources, because it is anyway their right, it's their human rights, being criminalized either by government or sometimes through agreements with investors who feel that their premises are being violated. How to deal with this, what protection mechanisms and what kind of alliances are there to constantly strengthen and ensure that defenders who are being attacked, or groups that are attacked at national levels get the right protection and can get the courage to continue in their struggle. So through our work, we found that there are some possible steps that we could use to do mobilization at the national level. We start by community organizing. And how do we do community organizing? By working with community, because sometimes communities are willing to engage, to mobilize, to work with civil society organizations and build these partnerships, but at the same time, they don't have knowledge about their rights, what are their rights and the rest. So we have the experience that when we collaborate with communities to train them on their rights, using both national and international legal human rights instruments, communities tend to gain consciousness, and they tend to begin to be more assertive in what they do, and they engage more because they have an understanding that it is, they become like sort of at the lead, they are in front, they are leading the process. And this is largely what we seek for, that the community's voice from a rights-based perspective is heard and is leading the process. Because when the community sustains efforts towards land governance, it is the outcomes are often very interesting. We also found that using international human rights instruments, but also national human rights instruments, that depending upon how how inclusive these national human rights instruments are, we could create spaces for dialogue. So, for example, when we think about the 10 new guidelines, the UN declarations on the rights of peasants, the UN declarations on the rights of indigenous people, having communities and national level alliances, for example, NGOs, CSOs, women rights movement that have built a national alliance, come together sometimes with allies from the government, because it's not like the government is always doing the wrong thing, but sometimes they are interested, they are allies from within the government that could facilitate the process. So if these CSOs and communities are able to, from the trainings I already mentioned, understand the rights, understand the provisions, understand how to frame this into policies, and they are able to negotiate a space where they can interact with the authorities, because in the end, policy and implementation, we cannot deny, needs also involvement of the state. So this is one of the experiences. And I already highlighted the point of building intersectional.
Glory, sorry to interrupt, but can you close, just come to a closing?
Yes, please. I was just at the last.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, so I was. The next point would be to build these intersectional movements. So when we have, for example, movements from forest, from land, and the rest, the point is that in most countries we have this disposition going on because policies governing forest resources are segmented, and the institutions are different from policies governing land, and when the CSOs are not in a strong alliance, it becomes difficult for their voice to be heard. And for this to be very robust, there is need for technical support and coordinated financial support. So we need to see that there is the package is complete. So not just the struggle, but technical support and financial support. I think that's the last point. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lori. Sorry to try to stop you, but you had a very condensed and wonderful presentation. I think your point about the national financing models following the ideological Western economic models is very good, and also the need for South-North alliances. I think we've all been speaking about that, but also the dangers of digitalization of land if it is top-down. And I think very important point you made, that if there are national alliances, that's not enough. They have to be inclusive. They have to include women. They have to include youth. And also the point about it's not enough, in fact, to have only land-based or movements only working on land, but we need to make alliances with environmental groups, with human rights groups, across, you said multi-sectoral movement alliances. And I like the point you made about how do we hold the state accountable and stop the criminalization of people's human rights, and also how we can use, and some examples you give of how we can use international and national instruments at the local level. So thanks very much. It's been quite an amazing presentations. We have a little less than half an hour left for discussions and comments. I see that there's quite a very lively discussion going on in the chat, and we don't have time to review all that, but I would request those of you who have posted on the chat, if you want to, repeat that for everybody, or if you have questions for a particular panelist, please go ahead. I would really request everyone who takes the floor to be very brief, so that we also have time to go back to the great panelists that we have. So please go ahead. If anyone has questions, comments, but please be brief. Thank you. You can raise your hand on the, I think Masa Kone, you have a, no. Echata Kone. Masa or Echata, you raised your hand, do you want to speak?
Oui, j'aimerais faire une petite contribution.
Okay, go ahead.
Je peux continuer?
Oui. Yeah.
Oui, bon, c'est Massa Koné, porte-parole de la convergence malienne contre les accaparements des terres et de la convergence globale de lutte pour la terre, l'eau et les semences paysannes. Et moi, je félicite vraiment les panélistes qui ont touché vraiment des points saillants pour l'accès à la terre. J'aimerais quand même mettre l'accent sur un point saillant qui est très, très important, dont Gloria a un peu touché. Et il faut aujourd'hui, obligatoirement, que la gestion foncière tienne compte de la diversité culturelle et traditionnelle des communautés. Ça, c'est aujourd'hui indispensable, que les États tiennent compte de la gestion coutumière des communautés. Les communautés ont traditionnellement leur forme de gestion foncière. Ça, c'est le premier point. Il facilite vraiment la sécurisation des terres, parce qu'on parle d'accès à la terre, on ne parle pas beaucoup de la sécurisation de la terre des communautés. Or, dans toutes les législations, on dit que la terre appartient à l'État, ou la terre appartient aux grands fazenders, ou aux grands patriarches, aux chefs coutumiers. Dans toutes les législations, nulle part, on voit que la terre appartient à celui qui l'exploite. Non, ils ont toujours donné une identité de propriété à la terre. C'est là où se situe le vrai du problème. Maintenant, comment résoudre cette situation? Il faut qu'il y ait un équilibre entre les lois des politiques foncières et la gestion traditionnelle des terres. Il faut qu'il y ait vraiment qu'on trouve un équilibre. Ça, c'est un. De deux, il faut du côté, il faut qu'il y ait un combat qui est transversal. Il faut vraiment que dans les législations foncières des pays, qu'on tienne compte de ces couches vulnérables. Ça, c'est un. Et tenir compte, comme on le dit en Afrique latine, la réforme agraire, mais en Afrique, la sécurisation des terres des communautés. Maintenant, de l'autre côté, au sein des communautés, dans la gestion coutumière, et qu'il y a aussi des insuffisances dans la gestion coutumière, il y a des insuffisances d'accès à l'attribution des terres au niveau des femmes et au niveau des migrants qu'on appelle les allochtones, au niveau des jeunes. Il faut qu'il y ait un gros du travail pour une innovation des justes et coutumes. Parce qu'il faut faire beaucoup attention. Ce n'est pas aller contre la gestion coutumière des terres, mais c'est de travailler pour une innovation de la gestion coutumière des terres. Et cette innovation va permettre d'évoluer vers l'équité à l'utilisation des terres et à la gestion des terres. C'est cette équité qu'on a besoin au niveau des us et coutumes, mais au niveau du gouvernement, des États, c'est le même équité qu'on a besoin, mais la sécurisation des terres des communes. Donc vraiment,
thanks very much, Massa. I think
c'est très important. Merci.
Okay, thank you very much, Massa. So I'd like to request, there are other questions. You have to raise your hand so that we can see you and call you. Okay, I have Abel.
Oui. Bonjour tout le monde.
Bonjour. Go ahead.
Oui, merci de m'avoir donné la parole. Moi, j'ai une autre opinion sur la gestion traditionnelle de la terre. Parce que, comme Mike a déjà dit, la terre, pour nous les Malgaches et la plupart des pays africains, la terre n'est pas conçue comme des biens à vendre, mais c'est sacré. Donc, ça fait partie de la religion, ça fait partie de, comment dirais-je, et après ça, cette idée d'appropriation vient plus après. Et c'est ça le problème parce que les paysans ne savent pas encore la vraie valeur de son patrimoine qu'est la terre en tant que ressource en tant que nourricière et tout ça, mais seulement des biens à contempler. C'est ça le vrai problème. Merci.
Okay, thanks very much. We have Asato, Billy. Go ahead. So, can you hear me? Or Alonso from Contact.
Eu posso falar.
Go ahead, Alonso. Go ahead.
Então, eu acho que esse terceiro debate sobre a questão agrária, reforma agrária e acesso aos bens comuns, a gente conseguiu identificar muitos problemas. A gente consegue identificar quais são os nossos gargalos. Acho que o grande desafio nosso enquanto organizações é apontar realmente do que fazer. Né? Que a gente acabou que, novamente, no tema de hoje qual que é o caminho a seguir. A gente tem uma diversidade de caminhos muito próprios a partir da luta e das tradições de cada país, não é nem só de cada país, mas de cada povo também. Então, acho que isso ainda é um gargalo para nós, apontar qual o caminho a seguir. Mas eu queria fazer também assim 2 comentários ainda nessa perspectiva do diagnóstico, né? Eu coloquei lá no fórum hoje uma imagem que o governo brasileiro, que o presidente colocou nas suas redes sociais ontem, que aqui no Brasil foi o Dia do Agricultor, para poder fazer menção ao Dia do Agricultor. A imagem que ele utilizou foi de um homem, de um caçador com um rifle nas costas. Essa foi a imagem que ele colocou. E fazendo alusão ao Dia do Agricultor, e na postagem, ele fazia menção à diminuição do número que ele chama de invasões, né? Das ocupações. Então, quando a população e os trabalhadores sem terra fazem a luta pela terra, eles chamam isso de invasão aqui, né? Não só aqui, mas no mundo. E a mensagem que o governo brasileiro, que o presidente Bolsonaro deu no Dia do Agricultor, foi de que as terras estavam mais protegidas e ainda fazendo menção que estendeu o direito ao proprietário, ao dono da propriedade, que na sua maioria são grileiros, de terras públicas, de terra de comunidades, a usar a arma em todo o seu território, em toda a sua propriedade. Essa foi a mensagem que ele passou ontem. E depois de uma pressão de várias notas, inclusive a CONTAG também emitiu nota, de parlamentares, eles retiraram essa imagem das redes sociais do governo federal. Mas assim, é só para poder destacar como que está. Teve uma das pessoas que falaram sobre a digitalização dos movimentos de quem faz a luta pela terra, em que nível que a gente se encontra aqui no Brasil, a luta pela reforma agrária, a luta pela terra.
Thanks very much, Alonso. We can only take, I think, one more question. So, Emmanuel, would you like to ask?
Oui, bonjour.
Bonjour.
Voilà. Je ne sais pas. Allô, est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Oui, on vous entend bien.
Oui. Ah oui, d'accord. Bonjour. Mais excusez-moi, je suis un peu, un peu ému de parler avec des panélistes de tous les pays, puisque j'ai par exemple une vision très partielle de la situation. C'est vrai que j'ai travaillé en Amérique latine, mais ici je me baserai plutôt comme ici en Europe sur cette mentalité capitaliste de la terre. Donc je vais parler uniquement des possibilités bureaucratiques et techniques de l'accès à la terre. C'est-à-dire que ici, nous avons voulu, ici en Belgique, faire des coalitions pour l'accès à la terre, et les arguments des politiques disent que ce n'est pas possible, c'est impossible, etc. Et plus j'ai étudié les possibilités de régulation politique, technique, plus j'ai vu que c'était possible techniquement. Donc, ce que je veux dire, tout simplement, c'est qu'en effet, quand je vois les nouvelles orientations des commissions de travail de l'Union européenne, ces rapports de travail invitent à réguler. Et en fait, c'est totalement possible de réguler. Ça veut dire que, bien entendu, il faut sortir du précepte. Toute personne, tout acteur, toute entreprise, État ayant de l'argent peut acheter de la terre. Ben non. C'est-à-dire, de plus en plus, on va aller vers, je l'espère, une régulation, c'est-à-dire toute personne ne peut pas, parce qu'il a de l'argent, que ce soit une multinationale, un État ou un milliardaire, acheter de la terre. Ce n'est pas comme ça. Il faut demander l'avis des populations locales. Bon, ici, c'est très bureaucratique en France, ça s'appelle la SAPER, qui est un pouvoir de préemption, mais ces instruments existent. Ça veut dire qu'une terre ne peut pas être vendue à tel prix, à tel acteur. Pourquoi? Parce que c'est une multinationale et ça menace notre souveraineté. Mais qui va décider de ça? C'est le problème, c'est bureaucratique au niveau de la SAPER, ce sont quand même des syndicats paysans, des consultations de membres du gouvernement. Donc, que ce soit pour la vente de terres, l'attribution de terres par la location, même chose, des organismes d'intermédiation entre le vendeur et celui qui cultive la terre, le bailleur et celui qui a en location, sont possibles techniquement. Maintenant, la difficulté est de mettre tout le monde autour de la table, les communautés, les syndicats paysans et les gouvernements. Mais il est évident que le grand problème, c'est évidemment cette vision des gouvernements qui disent ben non, c'est pas possible, c'est interdit par la loi, etc. Alors que nous avons absolument toutes les déclarations de la FAO qui vont dans ce sens. La Commission européenne qui invite à réguler. Donc, il faut dénoncer le fait que ce n'est pas possible. Techniquement, je ne peux pas aller plus loin dans mes analyses techniques. Techniquement, juridiquement, c'est possible. Et l'argumentation des gouvernements sont des fausses affirmations. Ils peuvent réguler. Mais non, c'est comment on va avoir, comment ils vont consulter la base, comment ils vont consulter les populations locales. Donc, excusez-moi d'avoir été un peu long. C'est mon espoir de réguler, voilà, un petit peu les... Excusez-moi d'avoir été trop long.
Pas grave, merci.
Okay, Emmanuel. Okay, we're going to take, I think, one more person. Aisatao, are you there? No.
Bonjour
okay.
à tous. Oui, je suis là. Vous m'entendez?
Oui,
Yes,
oui.
yes, go ahead.
Ok, merci. Et je félicite. Je suis chargée de la communication de la convergence globale des luttes et ouest africaine et de l'UACDD qui est à l'initiative de la création de cette convergence. Et j'ai intervenu au lancement de ce forum qui est très intéressant, qui est sur une thématique qui est à la une des actualités aujourd'hui. Et sans plus tarder, je vais m'appesantir sur l'intervention de Madame Dolores qui a parlé de l'accès des femmes et des jeunes à la terre. Et c'est vrai, aujourd'hui, nous voyons que les réalités sont différentes, surtout au Mali ici, nous qui travaillons plus avec les communautés. Et l'accès est vraiment difficile pour les femmes et les jeunes. Il faut le reconnaître. Et une fois les coutumes qui pèsent sur l'accès des femmes, ce n'est pas facile. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, la femme, elle est considérée comme quelqu'un ou une personne qui n'a pas droit à réclamer la terre ou à réclamer une chose qui la revient de droit. Alors qu'elle en a besoin. Si nous remarquons aujourd'hui, 80% de la population est nourrie par l'activité agricole par les femmes. Et nous travaillons avec les groupements de femmes du secteur informel. Et grâce à nos sensibilisations et à nos communications auprès des chefs coutumiers, aujourd'hui, les femmes ont accès à la terre. Mais ce n'est pas suffisant d'avoir seulement accès à la terre, mais il faut sécuriser cette terre, comme Massa a eu à dire. Il faut la sécuriser. Si ce n'est pas sécurisé, c'est comme un travail qui n'est pas complet, au fait. Donc, il faut que nous travaillions vraiment en synergie d'action. Et aussi, je suis d'accord avec Glory qui demande d'alliance et de partenariats avec, surtout avec les communautés. Au lieu de régler les problèmes en haut à l'international, il faut revenir à la base et chercher les vrais problèmes d'abord avant d'aller à l'international. Sinon, si la base est sécurisée, donc il y aura moins de problèmes à l'international et au national. Donc, l'accès des femmes, c'est un peu facile aujourd'hui avec l'intervention des ONG et des associations.
Thank you very much, I think.
Okay, merci.
Your point is very important.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go back to the panelists. I think we've heard quite a lot today about the need for national alliances, the need for inclusive national alliances, bottom-up work, also international alliances across sectors. And I just wanted to ask the panelists, and perhaps you can also respond to some of the questions that have comments that have been made, or to respond to each other's presentation just in 2 minutes each. How do you see us going forward collectively in your own work? How can we, how can we, as I say, scale up all the work that is going on, and not obviously, base it on the rights of people, and to be led, which is a point that's been coming across, to be led by people themselves. So I'm going to start in reverse. Just 2 minutes each. Glory, Luong, please, you can start. I think you're on mute, Glory.
So quickly moving forward, how to build these alliances and get forward. I think that it makes more, from my experience, starting with alliances that are already existing at the grassroots levels. So for example, we heard about the West African Convergence. That is one, for example. We have La Via Campesina is already a very global movement. Starting from these points, from the experiences of the people, understanding the challenges and the gaps at both national and regional level, and then bringing on board the missing expertise. Sometimes it's missing maybe human rights expertise, maybe it's missing funding. So moving from this perspective forward, I think that is a starting point.
Okay.
I mean, to be brief.
All right. Thanks very much. Thanks very much. Michael?
Yeah, thank you. Everybody's spoken about alliances, and I think our challenge is how we build those alliances, which on the one hand are actually have the capacity to bring about change, and on the other hand don't compromise a strong leadership role for people's organizations. And I think as the ILC, this is a balance which is very important to us. We have within our membership the likes of FAO, IFAD, UNEP, even the World Bank. We have organizations that often might be on the other side of the fence from those that we usually work with, but we see also the opportunity to find allies within those organizations. We see sometimes the opportunity to find allies within governments, reformists within governments that we can work with. And we need to do so. We need to widen those partnerships, but as I said, without compromising on our message, without compromising on our firm commitment to system change, and to the leadership of people's organizations. And I think as we do that, we need to also ask the land rights community here, and congratulations to the organizers, you've brought together a really amazing set of organizations. We need to work together effectively. We work for common goals. We sometimes have different ways of working, but those ways should be complementary. Those ways should reinforce each other. We need to be honest enough with each other when we need to challenge each other. IOC certainly sometimes has been challenged in how we work, and those are good challenges. Those help us to always keep that delicate balance that we're trying to build. But we need to spend our energies productively working in complementarity with each other. These kind of alliances are the only way that we're going to make a difference.
Okay, thanks very much, Michael. Hortense, would you like to? Yes, go ahead.
Merci. Par contre, moi, Je peux parler? Par contre, moi, c'est pour cela,
Yes, yes,
en
please.
tant que membre de la vie à Campesina, nous avons travaillé sur le droit paysan. Et dans le droit paysan, il y a beaucoup de thèmes qui ont été relevés, surtout sur le foncier. Nous pensons qu'à partir de ce droit paysan, on doit le traduire en langue nationale pour que les communautés puissent comprendre et connaître leurs droits. Parce que c'est un grand outil pour nous, les paysans, parce que dans le temps, dans le droit, il n'y avait pas de droit paysan et que les Nations Unies acceptent aujourd'hui ce droit paysan, c'est déjà un plus pour nous par rapport à nos luttes, par rapport aux plaidoyers que nous faisons envers le gouvernement et par rapport à ce que nous faisons aussi envers les chefs coutumiers traditionnels. Donc, moi, je pense que le gouvernement et la tradition, par exemple, nous avons fait une table ronde pour mettre les gouvernements et les chefs coutumiers et les ministres des fonciers ensemble avec les paysans pour pouvoir travailler avec eux, pour que les paysans puissent comprendre quelles sont les thématiques d'aujourd'hui, où va le monde, parce que tout est un mouvement, tout est changement, parce qu'ils ne doivent pas être à la tradition, ils doivent être à jour. Donc, la vie à Campesina est en train d'aider de faire ces traditions dans les langues afin que les paysans puissent comprendre, parce que la terre, c'est leur vie, c'est la mère nourricière, c'est tout ce qui est le trésor d'un paysan. Merci.
Okay, thanks very much. And Raja Gopalji, you have to show us the light, the way forward, please.
Thank you. One response will be to the Brazilian brief presentation, and it's for Michael, in fact. See, when you go to Brazil, you understand one family can keep thousands and thousands of acres of land. This is where this good practice idea need to be followed. You know, it's like India has a ceiling act. So a family can, however good or bad it is, but then a family can only keep 40 acres of wetland, irrigated land, or 20 acres of 40 acres of dry land and 20 acres of wetland, etc. I always thought, if this is happening in one part of the world, how do you take that idea to a country like Brazil? Because where thousands of acres of land is being held by one family. So the land ceiling idea. Similarly, in Latin American countries, we find this self-identification as a possibility, that somebody can say, look, I am an Afro-descendant, and that is accepted by the government. Now, whereas in India, we are lining up for years and years to get a caste certificate, a certificate to prove that I'm an indigenous person. So probably ILC could, already doing it, but then how do we get these learnings and experiences to influence other countries? That is one small request here. One response will be that because we are speaking about landlessness is increasing and land struggle groups need more solidarity, and we are basically speaking about a very, very insensitive, deep insensitivity situation. I thought what is important is to have alliance with the middle class. You know, it's like whenever poor people get organized, there is a kind of a resistance by the middle class, as if change is not interesting, everything for us. So how do you shift this idea of power and pride? That's what I always think, that how do you shift this idea of power and pride? Middle class educated people feel that when they say my country is a military power, my country is a nuclear power, my country is a business power, etc., they feel very, very proud of that. And shifting that and saying that my country is more democratic and my democracy is functioning and my country respects human rights, my country is addressing poverty, my country governance is more pro-poor, etc. See, unless you shift this paradigm for the middle class, all struggles, they will oppose all struggles, saying that they're all anti-national and it is not in the interest of the nation, etc. So building alliances with the middle class, educating them more about the struggle of poor class and being proud about the changing situation at the bottom will be something very, very important in the coming years for us to succeed. Thank you. Bye.
very much, Rajaji. So it's very difficult to conclude such a rich and very promising debate. But I think I like Glory's point about let's start with what exists and see what is missing. And I think that the parallel levels of work that are quite complementary that we have seen at the national and the international level, say with the example of Via Campesina, are very important. And Michael had mentioned this current struggle that all of us are involved in to get land recognized as an international human right. The UN Committee on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights is drafting a general comment on land, and we're all trying to influence that. And I think that that's perhaps one way in which we can, Rajagopalji, you were talking about land sealing, perhaps we can bring it back sort of, if we take it to the global level and get it accepted as a principle in an instrument, perhaps we can bring it back. But I think the real challenge, but for me, it's like Michael, I feel very, inspired by this kind of gathering of global voices at all different levels that we see today. And I think the big challenge is how do we continue to work together, and how do we stay in touch with each other, and how do we learn? I think it's very important to also, we talk about trainings and education, but it's also very important to have that kind of education across communities from community leaders. And how can we, as Michael was saying, provide a platform for that? So it's been an incredibly great debate, and I want to thank all the panelists for your presentations, and the participants who were very active on chat and who asked some very good questions and made comments. I want to request Christian to inform us. This is just the beginning of the Global Land Forum. So Christian, if you can tell us what is coming next and how people can stay involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Donc effectivement, ce webinaire clôt une première série de débats sur donc la question des Sans-Terre, mais il va être suivi par d'autres thèmes. Et le prochain, ce sera justement sur l'accès des femmes et des jeunes à la terre, et qui sera co-animé par la convergence globale des luttes en Afrique de l'Ouest, à partir de leur expérience sur justement comment encourager cette participation accrue des femmes et des jeunes dans les droits coutumiers. Je voudrais vous dire aussi que le débat, il y a eu des interventions très intéressantes sur le chat. Il ne faut pas que ça s'arrête là. Nous avons un espace de discussion en ligne que je vais vous montrer. Donc, quand vous allez sur notre site, vous arrivez sur les discussions en ligne. Là, c'est sur le thème 1, donc sur le thème qu'on a abordé. Et vous pouvez aller ensuite observer tous les échanges qu'il y a eu. Vous pouvez traduire instantanément dans une autre langue pour que ça corresponde à votre langue. Voilà, là, on a traduit en anglais. Et vous pouvez bien sûr rajouter vos commentaires, voir vos documents, comme l'a fait Alonso il n'y a pas très longtemps, dans la discussion. Donc, pour ce qui est de ce thème, nous allons produire une synthèse des discussions. Tout d'abord, nous allons poursuivre les discussions pendant quelques jours, et donc certains de vos commentaires mettent, à mon avis, des échanges, et même tout ce qui a été présenté peut être débattu, hein, c'est pas écrit dans le marbre. On va produire une synthèse qui sera renvoyée à tous les participants, et on espère bien que vous pourrez réagir et qu'on arrive, disons, à un document qui retrace bien l'état des débats sur cette question des Sans-Terre et des communs. Et ce sera un des éléments, disons, qui ira s'ajouter aux prochaines discussions thématiques, avec l'espoir que d'ici un an, disons, d'ici 8 mois, on ait une synthèse globale et puis j'espère l'occasion de se rencontrer physiquement parce que pour le moment c'est virtuel, c'est un petit peu comment dire, frustrant. Nos amis, nos partenaires africains ont demandé ou ont proposé que le prochain forum mondial sur les luttes pour la terre se tienne en Afrique. On espère que ça sera possible dans une échéance, peut-être pas l'an prochain, mais d'ici 2 ans. Et en tout cas, d'avoir le plaisir de vous rencontrer. Voilà, je vous remercie. Je remercie tout le monde. Et je vous rappelle aussi qu'au-delà des commentaires, vous pourrez retrouver la vidéo du webinaire et les différentes interventions, et également que vous êtes tous invités à poster les informations qui vous semblent pertinentes sur ce site dans la section les luttes en cours. Je suis désolé, là c'est en anglais, mais on peut avoir la version en français, on peut avoir la version anglaise. Ongoing struggles, donc vous allez dans cette section et vous pouvez poster des informations sur ce qui se passe dans vos différentes régions et les informations que vous souhaitez échanger. Voilà, merci à tous. Et merci surtout à nos conférenciers et à tous les participants qui ont fait l'effort de se joindre à nous. Au revoir.
Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Thank you.
Merci à tous et merci aussi à nos interprètes.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks to everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you to the interpreters.
Alors, il y a une remarque.
Thanks, Christian. Thanks, Malun. You did an excellent job guiding us all through.
All right, thank you.
And we have a whole team also at our back.
Yes, a lot of
young, bright people that help us to organize all that.
Yeah, we have the same in ILC.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. Goodbye. Yeah.
We need the next generation. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Christian, Pierre-André, Camille, on se fait un petit échange sur WhatsApp juste après.
Oui.
Merci.
Ok. Bon, merci à tous.